Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, another US forever war? Washington and Tehran have locked horns. Neither side is showing signs of backing down. They're stuck.
You end up in this mow the lawn approach.
Iranian capabilities will just grow back. In a moment, we'll look at how well positioned Tehran is to keep this war going, and if a full-scale conflict is close.
That would be all-out war. That would be essentially the continuous targeting of one another, with of course major fallout for the Gulf states, potentially pushing them closer and closer to direct intervention within Iran.
But all-out war? A ground invasion? There's talk of that again. Experts argue Donald Trump just wants a symbolic win, a quick in and out. He tried that last year. It didn't work. Other presidents tried the same in other countries, like Iraq. We'll get to that in a moment. First, where are we at?
Well, really, there are three ways forward from our current situation. This essentially cyclical retaliation, tit-for-tat, back and forth, and the no war, no peace scenario that many have described the Middle East as being in at the moment.
This is security analyst Megan Sutcliffe.
The three ways forward from this, of course, are first the status quo, that this essentially continues up until the United States and Iran either tire of this cycle or decide that they are going to engage more meaningfully in diplomacy and therefore negotiate a settlement out of this situation. That would be very destabilizing for the region. Essentially, we would be highly unlikely to see the resumption of supply chains through the Strait of Hormuz or a normalization of security and travel risk environments within the region during that time. The second way forward from this situation is, unfortunately, an escalation, essentially one in which this cycle continues to spiral upwards and the United States and Iran push each other closer and closer into full-scale conflict resumption. That would be all-out war. That would be essentially the continuous targeting of one another, with of course major fallout for the Gulf states, potentially pushing them closer and closer to direct intervention within Iran. That's a worst case scenario here, because that would present major pressure on global markets. It would fundamentally undermine the security of the Middle East, and it would likely leave a legacy of instability beyond not just the coming year, but possibly the coming 3 to 5 year period. The final way forward is actually a de-escalation. And while this seems relatively unlikely at this point in time, it's not unprecedented.
De-escalation requires a lot of pressure on both sides. Domestically in Iran, that huge protest movement before the war seems to have fizzled out. More on that later. For the Americans, casualties in comparison to the Iranians have been relatively low, but the potential political cost will become clear in the US midterm elections. There's definitely a cost for America's allies in the region, all of whom have been struck time and again, and there's still no let-up. There's something else I have to bring up here. Many of the senior leadership in Iran are veterans of another conflict in the 80s, the 8-year war Iran fought with neighboring Iraq. That not only shaped how the country approaches long-term conflict, but also the military doctrine it's pursued.
All of these individuals served in the Iran-Iraq war, and they will have seen what happens when Iran is confronted by a state that is militarily in some ways superior to it, with greater capabilities. That informed Iran's doctrine of spinning away from building up a conventional and symmetrical military force. Iran recognized from that conflict that it would not be able to do that. And that's why we've really seen it leaning in to its asymmetrical capabilities.
The US confrontations with Iraq may also offer an indication of where this conflict is headed. And I don't mean the US invasion of Iraq in 2003.
The comparison I would actually use is Iraq in the 1990s.
This is foreign policy analyst Kelly Grieco.
The United States was enforcing a no-fly zone over parts of Iraq. And that was actually a significant military operation that continued. And so there was this enduring commitment throughout the 90s that they were using air power to enforce that no-fly zone, at times conducting strikes as a result. And so I think it ends up being something like that, and that it would be, heavily air power centric. But yes, we're talking about a long-term enduring commitment with no end in sight.
Here's yet another point that suggests this war could drag on for a long time, or that Iran could at least hold out a lot longer than you may think.
The real challenge, though, becomes that even if the United States is able to destroy, let's say, 95% of Iran's missiles launchers, its missiles, and its drones. And that's not a number, just to be clear, that the CENTCOM has said that it is achieved. But even if it did, hypothetically, it would still have a 5% residual capacity. And that 5% is generally going to be enough for the Iranians to be able to disrupt traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. It doesn't take a lot of a missile and drone threat to be able to stop that traffic. So even if they were able to say, strike, a vessel once, every week or 2 weeks, it's what we're finding is that's enough to halt that traffic. And so that means that war disruption that Iran's waging is really hard for the United States to suppress.
Plus, there's another blocked strait, a new front in this war.
Hostilities have now escalated to the point that the Houthis have declared a blockade on Saudi Arabia.
The Iran-aligned Houthi rebels in Yemen are blocking the Bab al-Mandab Strait in the Red Sea, which was being used as an alternative to the Strait of Hormuz. That's sending global oil prices surging again. So the whole situation is only getting worse, and any off-ramps remain elusive.
The most acute and the most important goal that Iran has right now is ending the conflict with the United States on its terms. Those terms being an agreement which recognizes Iran's control of the Strait of Hormuz and allows it to levy things like service fees and environmental taxes, essentially another form of toll, as an economic lifeline. Iran also aims to end the conflict with the United States in a way that would be conducive to a nuclear agreement that is on its terms.
The chance of that? Well, the line from Tehran is that they're dealing with a weaker leader than US presidents past. And as long as there are missiles and bombs dropping on Iran, the regime controls the internal narrative.
We entered this year in a series of mass protests opposing the government and calling for fundamental change. However, the fact that the government and the Islamic Republic has been able to survive this conflict now has an increased access to economic lifelines, as well as things like frozen assets that were previously held overseas. That is going to increase the government's repressive capacity, its ability to prevent and deter unrest, and therefore the prospects for regime change, for a popular uprising, or any kind of liberalization within the Islamic Republic, that seems even further away than ever before.
What they found is that despite killing all those leaders, the Iranian regime proved more resilient than expected. And of course, it continues on. And so when that failed, they had to go to their plan B. And it seems their plan B was largely about degrading Iranian capabilities and capacity. The problem, though, is that they made that the objective. And I'll just note that that objective is those are a set of military objectives. It was never really clear what that set of military objectives, what political objective it's trying to support. Because if those are the objectives, of course, we're going to end up in this situation where that leads us, into this potential mowing the lawn situation.
Sounds horrible, but this day-to-day business of war is becoming more of a chore, if you can say that, albeit with life and death consequences, and no end in sight. I'm Ben Fajzullin. Thanks for joining us.